It's Monday, July 18th. Just when you thought it was safe to take off your masks, this summer had other plans. We start here. The latest wave of COVID cases is renewing calls to mask up.
A layer between you and others that protects you from transmission. It seems like very basic science.
We'll talk to health experts on ways to help you navigate the highly contagious BA.5 subvariant. Without further delay, Steve Bannon is headed to court.
There's a lot they were hoping to talk to Steve Bannon about. That's why he was one of the very first people that they subpoenaed.
What his contempt trial means for the January 6th investigation. More outrage and heartbreak in Uvalde.
They get paid to protect, to serve, and they didn't do nothing.
Victims' families of the Robb Elementary mass school shooting react to a new investigative report on what went wrong. From ABC News, this is Start Here. I'm Michelle Franzen. Hey there, Brad's off today. I'll be taking you through the news, starting with the rising tide of COVID cases from an extremely contagious subvariant. Year 3 of the pandemic is looking a lot like Year 2. The summer surge of COVID cases due to the Omicron subvariant BA.5 hasn't peaked yet, and CDC data shows more than half of the American population is living in a high-risk community level for COVID, and the remainder of the population isn't far behind in the medium-risk zone.
But we're still seeing some protection against infection, but not as much.
The nation's health experts are now recommending people wear masks in public regardless of vaccination status. White House COVID-19 coordinator Dr. Ashish Shah said on ABC's This Week, we're in a way better place than we were a year and a half ago, but we still have work to do.
Infected, we're seeing high levels of reinfection. We're seeing people who are not up to date on their vaccines, have a lot of breakthrough infections.
John Brownstein is Chief Innovation Officer at Boston's Children's Hospital and a professor at Harvard Medical School. He's also an ABC News medical contributor and joins us to talk about the risks and how to navigate the latest wave. John, the mask debate has been with us as long as COVID. Los Angeles County is talking about reinstating mask rules, but how effective are masks against this super contagious subvariant BA.5?
You know, Michelle, there is nothing as contentious as the mask debate of anything that we've dealt with the pandemic. And it's very surprising as a scientist because a layer between you and others that protects you from transmission, it seems like very basic science, but also at the community level. When you take on masks at a community level, you will see transmission go down. And that is why communities like LA are deciding to take on masking, because they're looking at their particular context, seeing a surge, and ultimately applying correct interventions to help reduce risk and ultimately not allowing for further transmission that would ultimately create a surge in our hospitals and a capacity concern. And so masking makes sense, but in a highly targeted way. That's why we have to be very specific in the timing of masking. You're pre-surge in a community, you're seeing cases go up. That's when you want to bring in masks to help reduce transmission, help reduce the risk to our health systems. But these are not broad-scale mask mandates across the country for undefined amounts of time. These are very targeted, and this is why it's done at the local public health level, where they can look at the data and make these decisions and have people engage in a very important intervention to reduce the risk to the community.
In terms of vaccination, we are in a much better place than last year. More Americans are vaccinated, boosted. There are treatments to help with those symptoms. But how is this latest subvariant throwing a wrench into all the tools we have at our disposal?
Well, first, it's really important to note that the tools that we have still work. If you're fully up to date with your vaccines, especially if you've gotten that booster and that second booster if eligible, it dramatically reduces your risk of severe illness and death. So that's point number one. Testing still works. Masking still works. So all the tools still work. The issue is that this new variant is highly transmissible. It's immune evasive in the sense that if you are exposed to this variant, your previous immunity from vaccination and potentially other variants, likely non-Omicron variants, doesn't necessarily protect you in the same way as previous infections. And so we're going to see increased amounts of breakthrough infections. Many of those will not turn, of course, into severe illness, but they're turning into infections that ultimately lead to more transmission. And then we'll see the impact in our most vulnerable communities, those that are elderly, immunocompromised, and we'll see history repeating itself. And that's the real concern we have with this new immune evasive variant.
And how does testing factor in? Should Americans be testing regularly at home.
Testing is such an important first line of defense. We've seen testing dramatically reduce. People are not going to get PCRs, and even home testing is declining. And that's a problem because if people don't have awareness of their infection, they are not necessarily isolating, potentially creating risk in the community. And that leads, of course, to these surges that we're seeing. And so I advocate, the testing, it's simple. There's so much availability. There's free home tests that the Biden administration is offering. Please use those because that really will have such an impact on the course of this BA.5 surge.
Health experts say they're focusing on a booster for adults this fall, a new one targeting the latest subvariants. But should the government be expanding access to this second booster that we already have for adults?
Well, it's a very complicated answer because the data isn't absolutely clear about this for young, healthy adults. For older Americans, those who are immunocompromised, the risk is significant and getting that second booster is clear. I think we're still waiting for compelling data. At the same time, there should be broad availability. There is plenty of supply out there. So if someone feels, based on their own risk tolerance, that they want that second booster, there's really no downside. So I think it makes sense to expand that availability. But we have to be very careful here because the messaging on boosters has been complicated. We don't want to create vaccine fatigue. And we especially want to make sure that we have compelling reasons to get people boosted in the fall when we have this new variant-specific bivalent vaccine. So I think making sure that we can make it available to as many people who want it without sort of undermining a potential fall vaccination strategy.
All right. That's John Brownstein with Boston's Children's Hospital. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Next up on Start Here, it's day one of the contempt of Congress trial for Steve Bannon. A preview of what to expect after the break.
This is ABC News Live.
The crush of families here in Poland.
At refugee centers
In Putin's Russia.
On the ground in Ukraine.
Close to the front line.
Here at the White House.
Destructive Cat 4 storm.
Here along I-5.
Boston is in the bullseye.
Let's go. We made it.
ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Anytime, anywhere. Streaming 24/7, straight to you for free.
Thank you for making ABC News Live America's #1 streaming news.
Admit it. These days, what you need to know
Seems to change just about every day.
What is it that you really want to know, need to know,
To help you not just get through your day,
but to make the most of it? Feel smarter.
feel better.
Feel happier.
Well, how about a third hour of Good Morning America?
GMA 3, what you need to know. Now streaming on ABC News Live.
It's all about you.
America's #1 news, ABC News. Most watched, most trusted, and streaming live to you anytime, anywhere, and free. This is ABC News Live, America's #1 streaming news. Free to you 24/7. Watch America's #1 news whenever you want it, wherever you are, anytime. ABC News Live, streaming live and free on all platforms.
National parks are incredibly safe places, but crime will happen.
Hey, Mama. My wife had fallen. She's in really critical condition.
At that time, I thought it was just a tragic accident. There's still a lot of questions we need to ask.
There were small things that didn't totally add up.
This is 2 lives for Harold that have died now. I was shocked. Something's not right.
He conned his way through love.
He was a rock star surgeon.
Sexy. And the wedding of a lifetime.
Andrea Bocelli was going to be singing. The guest list just kept growing.
The icing on the cake was the Pope was going to marry them.
Are you kidding me?
But when he put lives at risk, the con was up. Now, with the shocking verdict just in, stunning new details.
How dare you? Who the hell does that?
The 2020 event, Friday night at 9/8 Central on ABC.
Thank you for making ABC's This Week, Sunday morning's #1 news show versus the competition.
A big week ahead for the investigation into the January 6th attack. The House Select Committee holds a prime-time hearing Thursday. The panel recently issued a subpoena for the Secret Service to answer questions about deleted text messages on the day before and day of the U.S. Capitol riot.
All hell is going to break loose tomorrow.
Breach of the Capitol to the upper level.
But first up today, Steve Bannon heads to court for the start of his criminal contempt of Congress trial. Last week, a judge denied a delay request for the conservative talk show host and former Trump White House advisor. ABC's Mary Alice Parks is here for a preview. Let's start with Bannon. He's exhausted those legal challenges, trying to delay the trial for refusing to comply with the subpoena issued by the January 6th committee. He's facing criminal contempt, and the judge has set strict limits for the arguments Bannon and his attorneys can make at the trial. The judge rejected earlier arguments of executive privilege under former President Trump. Bannon was no longer a member of the White House. So what is he planning as his defense?
Yeah, that's a great question. And the judge has basically been asking that. So far, the judge has not been very interested or moved by any of the defense's planned defense, really saying that they're worried there's not much facts in this case worth debating and that really Bannon should consider a plea deal.
From the start, he said he's willing to comply if they just resolve the privilege issue, which he feels he's bound by.
And Bannon and his attorneys presented multiple arguments for delaying the trial, which is now running up against the House committee's final week of public hearings. Is there a chance that the committee could still hear from Bannon?
That's feeling less and less likely, especially as it seems like this trial is going to go forward. That's one of the downsides of bringing criminal charges, is that the potential of never getting that coveted important evidence.
We all know the history with our request to have talked to Steve Bannon, so we'll see how that comes out. But the bottom line is, yes, we as a committee want to talk to anybody that has information.
There's a lot they were hoping to talk to Steve Bannon about. That's why he was one of the very first people that they subpoenaed, why they were so frustrated when he wouldn't turn over documents. I mean, they know that Steve Bannon was meeting with people the night here in Washington the night before on January 5th. They know that he had phone conversations with the president on January 6th. There's a lot they wanted to be able to press him on, but he just kept refusing to cooperate at every single turn, and that's how it's come to this.
And in the past week, we've also heard about Secret Service, these text messages from January 5th and the 6th that Inspector General said were deleted. Get us up to speed on this and what this means for the panel and what they want to know.
Yeah, this is just a remarkable story. I mean, the Steve Bannon trial is so rare, and this feels so weird, too. I mean, the Secret Service, according to the January 6th committee, was told multiple times by both the January 6th committee as well as investigators at the Department of Homeland Security to preserve all communications from January 5th and January 6th of last year, including text messages.
You can imagine how shocked we were to get the letter from the Inspector General saying that he had been trying to get this information and that they had, in fact, been deleted after he'd asked for them.
But then this news that the Inspector General at the Department of Homeland Security reported to the committee that he was being told Secret Service actually erased and deleted those text messages as a part of a device replacement plan, that they had this program to update cell phones and that some of those text messages were lost.
If a government agency, particularly a law enforcement agency, is doing a migration of phones, they are required to ensure that any data contained on those phones is uploaded and retained.
They sent this letter and this subpoena to the Secret Service. The first time, actually, that they subpoenaed a federal agency, clearly just annoyed and frustrated that it had to come to that they had to resort to that.
I was shocked to hear that they didn't back up their data before they reset their iPhones. That's crazy. I don't know why that would be.
They mentioned again how the Secret Service was asked several times to preserve these documents and how they want the records now. They're not waiting around. They want all records, anything preserved, to be turned over by Tuesday.
There are Government Records Act, and there are other reasons why a law enforcement agency would want that information that's contained on that phone to be retrievable, not the least of which would be discovery motions in court.
Now, Secret Service has put out statements this last week saying that they did nothing wrong. And in response to the subpoena, they've said that they are cooperating and will respond.
Is there a chance that these text messages could have been backed up somewhere else in a cloud?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what they're hoping for. I think a lot of people here in Washington are sort of scratching their heads. It's hard to imagine government records really just being completely lost. So I don't know if they're going to be able to find them, figure that out. But of course, there's a lot the committee's hoping these messages could reveal, any other details about President Trump's movements that day. And also whether they could shed light potentially on some of these really, really tough allegations.
There were discussions about him having another speech outside of the Capitol before going in. I know that there was a conversation about him going into the House chamber at one point.
We've heard witnesses accuse President Trump of wanting to go himself with the rioters to the Capitol, of being told that the rioters were armed ahead of time when they were there at his rally. So the committee thinks these text messages could be a crucial piece of evidence to back up or not back up some of those allegations.
And the House Select Committee is expected to hold a primetime hearing later this week. That's only the second out of at least 7 hearings so far that was at night. What can we expect?
Yeah, they've really been sort of leading up to this. They're careful to say it might not be the last hearing, but it's the last one for now. It's the last one they have scheduled. And they've promised essentially a minute-by-minute account of January 6th.
What kind of man knows that a mob is armed and sends the mob to attack the Capitol and further incites that mob when his own vice president is under threat, when the Congress is under threat? It's very chilling.
And specifically what President Trump was doing bit by bit that day, or as they would say, what he was not doing that day.
All right. Mary Alice Parks, thanks very much.
Thanks.
Nearly 2 months after a gunman stormed Robb Elementary in Uvalde, Texas, killing 19 students and 2 teachers, a Texas State House committee released its preliminary findings on what went wrong leading up to and on that tragic day.
That day, several officers in the hallway or in that building knew or should have known there was dying in that classroom.
The committee says it found a series of systemic failures on all levels, from the law enforcement response to the school's safety measures.
And let me say this. With hindsight, we can say the Robb Elementary was not adequately prepared for the risk of a school shooter.
ABC's Aaron Katursky has been following this case from the start. Aaron, what are some of the key findings of this report?
There were missed signals and missed opportunities by law enforcement to take command of the scene and to actually go in and save lives. But the report, Michelle, said that officers, and there were almost 400 of them, the report said, on scene, outnumbering the gunman, nearly 400 to 1. The report said they prioritized their own safety over the safety of the children in that classroom.
And they should have done more, acted with urgency, tried the door handles, tried to go in through the windows, tried to distract him, tried to do something to address the situation.
No one took command. The incident commander, Pete Arredondo of the tiny Uvalde School Police Department, has said he didn't feel like he was the commander, but we know that in the very policy that he wrote, the report said it put him in charge. It put the school district police chief in charge. And even if he wasn't in charge, there were plenty of other federal and state and local agencies that had come to the scene that could have taken control.
If they didn't take over command or try to assume command, they should have began asking questions or offered their support and guidance. And eventually, maybe they would have gotten command to have a better response from that.
The investigators said they could not determine that more competent or faster police action would have actually saved any lives, because so many of the bullets were fired in the first moments of the massacre.
And is this the first time that we've heard just how many law enforcement agencies and officers were responding that day?
376. We didn't have the full number of federal, state, and local officers. And the officials in Uvalde were anxious to point that out.
We do not have jurisdiction over federal officers, agents, to basically, force them to comply with the subpoena to bring them in. So
they felt like the blame had been heaped on them by the Texas Department of Public Safety, when in fact the assertion from the mayor of Uvalde, for example, all along has been there was plenty of blame to go around. And I think that in some ways this backs that up. One thing the report does do knocks down a finding by Texas State University that someone had an opportunity to take out the gunman before he even entered the classroom. The report says that couldn't be true because the person that the officer was actually aiming at was a school teacher, was a gym teacher who was outside. So all along, the official accounts have been unreliable and officials have been unwilling to really take questions. So this goes a long way in fleshing out what happened.
This report also provides some new details about the suspected gunman who died that day. Does it give us any idea of a motive?
Well, the one idea is that he was seeking notoriety and fame, according to the report, and targeted a classroom he was familiar with. The gunman, Salvador Ramos, had gone to Robb Elementary School. He attended 4th grade in one of the very classrooms where he opened fire.
He fits the profile of many. He came from a broken home with little to no interaction with his father.
He had a troubled upbringing. He really had no relationship, it seems, with his father, who kind of left and went back to North Dakota, where he was born. He was raised by his mother, but then became estranged from her, eventually was living with his grandmother. At one point, he was bullied at school. He had a stutter, and that may have been the cause of bullying. And teachers determined that he was at risk because he was falling so far behind. But the report says at no time did he ever receive any special education services.
He networked with his peers through social media and violent video games. It ultimately had a fixation on school shootings and even developed the nickname school shooter.
And at home, a cousin even mentioned talking about suicide with him. And we're not sure whether the family was properly attuned to the dark place, as the report calls it, that he was going down really toward the end of 2021 when investigators said he first had a vague idea of carrying out a school shooting.
So this report, it provides new details about the suspected gunman, the police response. How are parents and residents of Uvalde responding to this report? It opens up those fresh wounds again.
It sure does. And we heard from many of the families either that they still didn't trust it because they said this all started with inaccuracies.
It's already been over a month and we're barely getting answers. Come on. If there was their kids, would it be different?
We heard others say, well, it's thorough and it's more detailed, but it's not going to bring their kid back.
They get paid to protect, to serve, and they didn't do nothing.
And I think there is a reality to all of this. There were some missed signals. There were some official failings, and the report cites the school kind of being lax about closing doors and making sure locks were working and all that. But this was someone with a high-powered rifle who was determined to fire on a room full of kids. And the report makes clear that, you know, it's not certain any of this could have been fully prevented, although there were steps along the way. And the most crucial one was the prioritizing of officer safety over the lives of the kids. Nobody went in there for 77 minutes. There's already been some immediate fallout. The mayor of Uvalde has put the acting police chief of the city, who was there that day commanding his officers, put him on leave and is conducting an investigation of how the city department conducted itself. They're releasing body camera footage to perhaps give different angles and different information. There's audio on that, so we'll be able to hear, crucially, what was coming over the radio. One of the report findings is that there were a ton of agencies on scene and nobody communicating anything to anybody. And it's stunning that 20 years after 9/11, we're still talking about inoperable radios and all of that. And the district attorney in Uvalde is conducting her investigation that she has said, according to the Uvalde Leader News, could result in criminal charges. Michelle, there's no law that we know of that mandates bravery, and we don't know whether ultimately officers will face criminal charges for this.
It sounds like we've got a long way to go yet in this investigation. Aaron Katursky, as always, thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
And one last thing. A burning question when it comes to climate change, how to fight it. Democratic Senator Joe Manchin has all but closed the door on President Biden's goals to combat climate change, saying he won't vote for the president's climate package.
It is the future of the planet. So when Manchin sabotages climate change, this is for future generations, what's going on right now.
The West Virginia senator holds one of the key votes for Democrats passing any legislation without the support of Republicans. Manchin says he wants to focus on inflation, but the White House says it's not closing the door on talks. Environmental experts say we're seeing the results of climate change play out this summer with extreme heat and drought.
Record-scorching temperatures in Texas topping 110 are keeping paramedics busy with nearly double the number of heat-related calls compared to last summer.
In just the past week, Texas has been locked in a heat wave that's tested the state-run power grid.
You have this kind of heat over major populations, you get a big draw on that electric demand, and it looks like we may have just switched over to generator power. Our lights just went out.
In Houston, a meteorologist at ABC station KTRK was warning residents about the hot spell that could lead to rolling blackouts when the power at the station went out. Those extreme temperatures are also making it harder for firefighters to battle and contain explosive wildfires in states like New Mexico and California. And it's not just in the U.S.
In southwestern France, more than 12,000 residents evacuated. The scorching temperatures melting roadways.
A deadly heat wave in Europe is blamed for more than 1,000 deaths so far in Spain, France, and Portugal. Firefighters in southern Europe battled out-of-control wildfires, including a blaze that reached two popular Atlantic beaches Sunday.
It's time to stop burning our planet and start investing in the abundant renewable energy all around us.
With climate change seemingly impacting every corner of the world and our lives, experts say it's important now more than ever to take both local and global action. And that's where we leave it. For more on these stories, check out abcnews.com or the ABC News app. I'm Michelle Franzen. Brad's back tomorrow. I'll catch you next time.
ABC News, America's #1 news source.
All right, here we go. You ready? Let's do it.
Yes, it's the show America wants and America needs right now.
This is What Would You